Fairy tales weren't always meant for children. Shared by the whole family, these old folk stories included plenty of details meant to entertain adults too. These are 5 fairy tales that are far darker than you remember. Little Red Riding Hood. The most famous version of this fairy tale comes to us from the Brothers Grimm of Germany. In their version, the girl, referred to as Little Redcap, gets eaten by the wolf along with her grandmother, only to be saved by a huntsman who cuts the wolf open and pulls them out of his belly. The story then goes on to establish how Red and her grandmother become extremely watchful of any wolves from that point forward. A little morbid, okay, but trust me, it gets so much worse. In an earlier version by French writer Charles Perrault, rather than having Red learn from her encounter with the wolf, the story ends with a warning to young girls to avoid the wolves in their own lives, stating, "Children, especially attractive, well-bred young ladies, should never talk to strangers, for if they do so, they may well provide dinner for a wolf." Okay, a little victim blamey, but it's potentially this version that encouraged several later writers to lean a little further into the interpretation of the wolf representing animal attraction.
I want a diamond ring, I want some bracelets and everything.
The 1931 animated short, Dizzy Red Riding Hood, has Betty Boop's good guy boyfriend Bimbo repeatedly rescue her from the advances of the wolf, thus ensuring that a 1930s audience can continue interpreting her as a good girl. But more feminist interpretations of the fairy tale, such as Angela Carter's 1979 short story, In the Company of Wolves, has Red actually give in to the wolf's advances.
Jesus, what big teeth you have!
In versions of the story still older than Perrault's, Red finds the wolf dressed as her grandmother and lying in her bed, but when the wolf instructs her to drink some wine and eat some rice in the kitchen, she does so without realizing that it's actually her grandmother's blood and teeth. The wolf then asks her to throw her red cloak into the fire and get into bed naked, and Red does this. Upon realizing that she's in bed with a wolf rather than her own grandmother, Red says that she needs to use the bathroom and sneaks away. Some have speculated that this version of the story began in the court of King Louis XIV, inspired by tales court maidens would tell about the king's cross-dressing bisexual brother, who would apparently enter women's-only salons to lie in the ladies' beds and encourage them to sleep with him. Due to adultery laws in France at the time, any woman who would have given into his advances most likely would have faced either banishment or death, which is why it's so important that Red escape in these earlier versions. If she gets eaten by the wolf here, there's no coming back. Sleeping Beauty. You're probably most familiar with the Disney version of this fairy tale, which draws the majority of its inspiration from Charles Perrault's The Sleeping Beauty in the Wood. This version similarly follows the story of a princess who falls into a cursed sleep upon pricking her finger on a spindle, and must be woken by the love of a prince. The earliest known version of this tale, however, is Perceforest, published anonymously in France sometime between 1330 and 1344. In this version, the prince comes across a naked woman lying comatose in her bed, and he proceeds to non-consensually impregnate her. She gives birth to the child while asleep, but once the child bites her finger, a flax chip from a spindle falls out and the woman proceeds to awaken. The 1634 Italian fairy tale Sun, Moon, and Talia by Giambattista Basile similarly tells of a king who impregnates a comatose girl named Talia. When Talia awakens and discovers that she's now mother to twins, she falls in love with the king, but the two cannot marry because he's already married. The queen becomes enraged upon learning about Talia, and so she sends her cook to kill the children and serve them to the king for dinner as punishment. The cook decides to serve lamb instead, revealing the queen's betrayal and freeing up the king to throw his old wife into the fire and marry Talia instead. Makes it easy. Hansel and Gretel. While the works of the Grimm brothers have become famous worldwide, one of their main intentions when they put together their collection of fairy tales was to establish a sense of German nationalism. They felt that their home region was rich with unrecorded culture and history, and that it was the folk stories that their people told that reflected that better than anything. children. And if you're looking for an example that showcases that perfectly, look no further than Hansel and Gretel. This tale of two young children being abandoned by their parents in the woods only to be lured into the clutches of a child-eating witch may seem to be pure fancy, but it's actually a remnant from the Great Famine that struck the Baltic regions between 1314 and 1322. During this time, volcanic activity in Southeast Asia and New Zealand caused worldwide food shortages, and may have killed up to 25% of the population in certain areas. Elderly people would often choose to starve to death rather than take food that could have gone to young people during this time, and parents were often forced to abandon children that they could no longer afford to feed. An Estonian chronicle from 1315 also suggests that mothers would take to eating their own children with no other food sources available. This appears to be the climate that poor Hansel and Gretel find themselves in, and so the fact that they're able to escape the clutches of a woman intent on eating them actually is a much happier ending than many of their peers at the time got.
The captor now gone and her fires all put out. They were free to go.
The Little Mermaid. This classic tale of a mermaid longing to be human comes to us from Danish writer Hans Christian Andersen, and yet his 1837 publication of the tale is a little different from the 1989 Disney animated musical. In his version, the mermaid wants to be human not to be with the prince, but so that she can earn an immortal soul, which is apparently something that mermaids do not have. She is told that she can earn this if she can make a human fall in love with her, and so she makes an agreement with a sea witch who then proceeds to grant her legs in exchange for physically cutting out her tongue. Every step the mermaid takes on her new legs is agony, as though she's walking on knives, and yet she manages to make the prince love her like a sister. But she isn't able to make him fall in love, as he's already betrothed to another. Part of her agreement with the witch was that if the prince marries someone else, she will die, but her sisters offer her a dagger that will turn her back into a mermaid if she uses it to kill him. The mermaid considers doing this before ultimately throwing both the dagger and herself off the side of a cliff. Rather than simply dying at the end, the mermaid is taken off by angels so that she can earn her place in heaven by doing good for humankind. Andersen's version of the story is meant to highlight the importance of sacrifice, but it doesn't necessarily translate into the same feel-good sort of romp. Beauty and the Beast. The story of a beautiful woman falling for a monster truly is, as they say, a tale as old as time, and yet the version of this story we're most familiar with is based off of Jean-Marie Le Prince de Beaumont's 1756 French fairy tale La Belle et la Bête, which is a little bit different from the Disney version we've all come to know and love. For one thing, there's no Gaston.
What's wrong with her? She's crazy.
Instead, the villains of the story are Beauty's jealous sisters, who envy the material possessions that Beast showers on her and lures her away from the castle long enough for the Beast to die of loneliness. Upon returning to the Beast, he professes his love to her as he lays dying, which makes Beauty realize that she loves him too, thus breaking the curse that had been upon him and turning him into a prince. Beaumont most likely intended this version of the story to serve as a lesson to young girls facing arranged marriages at the time, encouraging them that if they only try to love the hairy, older men that they're intended for, then he might turn out to be a prince after all. In some ways, this lesson makes Beauty and the Beast twin to stories like Charles Perrault's 1697 French fairy tale Bluebeard, which similarly follows a young girl in an arranged marriage, but rather than discovering that her husband is a prince, she finds out that he's murdered his wives before her, and now that she knows his secret, she's become his next intended victim. I suppose both scenarios were equally as likely, so it's nice to know that there is a fairy tale for either possibility. Which example did you find to be the most shocking? And are there any dark fairy tales that I missed? Make sure to let me know down in the comment section, and cast a curse on the subscribe button while you're at it. Until next time, my fellow witches, stay curious.